So Disney just released the full ride-through video of Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and people have a lot of thoughts. Hi, I'm James from Guide to WDW, and I've seen a lot of reactions to Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Some positive, and some negative. Very, very negative. It's not surprising that people are having a big response. After all, there's a lot riding on this ride. It replaces Splash Mountain, which was one of the most beloved rides of all time at Disney World. And this is Disney's big new thing for the parks this year, and probably the last major ride open before Epic Universe opens. So today, I want to take a look at Tiana's Bayou Adventure as a theme park ride, and see whether it's an upgrade or downgrade from Splash Mountain. It turns out it's not so simple. I'm going to look at several different categories and decide whether Tiana is better or worse as a ride. Spoilers for Tiana from here on out. Let's start with what's exactly the same, which is the ride system, track, and vehicles. The drops are exactly the same. Although surprisingly, Tiana's Bayou Adventure doesn't replace the little rabbit on the front of the log with a frog. They could have even called them frog logs. It's a tiny downgrade, but worth noting. Also, to me, the music is equally good in both rides. Tiana has this old-timey radio effect on Almost There at the beginning that's really cool. But Splash Mountain has the energy of all the characters singing the songs throughout the ride. Like all of this, it's a matter of taste, but it didn't stand out to me as much better or worse. Okay, now let's get into the differences between the rides. 1. The animatronics. This is the biggest upgrade for Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Disney's marketing push for the ride has really focused on these new animatronics, and for good reason. There are multiple A1000 figures on this ride, which are Imagineering's most advanced animatronics ever. They are very expressive and fluid. And unlike Na'vi River Journey, where there's only one animatronic at the end of the ride, you see a lot of animatronics throughout Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The animatronics on Splash Mountain were much more primitive, because they were based on much older technology even when the ride was new. At Disneyland, many of these were repurposed from the America's Sing show that debuted in the 1970s. At Disney World, the figures were a bit newer, but still they relied on hydraulics and pneumatics, which required a lot of expensive maintenance and weren't very reliable. The Splash Mountain animatronics broke down a lot. It was pretty common to see a figure frozen in place, or an effect like Brer Rabbit bouncing away not working. The newer animatronics on Tiana's Bayou Adventure use electric motors, which should be much more reliable and easier to maintain. These are a huge upgrade. That's just the march of technology for you. But things are a little less clear when we look at quality versus quantity. Splash Mountain had a lot more animatronics. There were dozens of figures, and yes, many of them had very simple movement, but they were everywhere throughout the indoor parts of the ride, giving everything a visual density. No matter where you looked, there was something interesting happening. Tiana's takes a different approach. At first, there's fewer figures, but they have way more impressive animation. This brings us to one of the biggest complaints people have about the new ride. It feels too empty for stretches. This is most evident in the first indoor scene. You see Lewis, who tells you that we're looking for a band. We see Tiana and the Critter Band. Then after a stretch, we see Tiana and Lewis in the Critter Band. And then there's another stretch and we see Tiana and Lewis before we drop down into the second big scene. Between these animatronic scenes, there's not a ton going on, other than just enjoying the music and the vibes. In Splash Mountain, we see a lot of visual gags of Brer Fox and Brer Bear trying to capture Brer Rabbit and failing. There's no downtime between these vignettes. This is an issue. I'll get more into that later. To be fair to Tiana, this is less of a problem as the attraction goes on, because the second scene were shrunk down and everything is much more visually interesting with oversized props. And the finale is really dense with lots of figures. This is where the side-by-side comparisons are most favorable to the new ride. They also added an advanced A1000 figure to the shack in the early portion of the ride. And that is an upgrade. I think this is a case where Splash Mountain set a certain expectation. In a vacuum, the first indoor scene for Tiana looks great to me. It reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland before the first drop, where you're just riding through the bayou, and it's all about establishing a mood before we get into the zanier and more colorful parts of the ride. Plus, this does have a lot of great animatronics. But when you are directly comparing it to Splash Mountain, it does feel empty, because there's just a lot less going on. It's a bad first impression if you have Splash Mountain on the mind. It's a downgrade. But what makes a good impression are the lighting effects. I think the lighting overall is a big upgrade for Tiana's Bayou Adventure. There are a lot more lighting effects throughout, and the nighttime lighting package is just gorgeous. Upgrade for sure. 4. The screens. Now what's a bit more complex is the inclusion of screens. Overall, I think the screens in Tiana's Bayou Adventure are well done. Most of the time they're adding depth to the background, which is not that different than the scrim showing the blue sky in Splash Mountain. When you're tiny, there are these screens that show Tiana and Louis looking huge, and I think that works well, because there are a bunch of physical props around. Now, the screen of Mama Odie instead of the Boot Hill Boy figures on the final lift hill isn't my favorite. I think they kind of wrote themselves into a corner because Mama Odie needs to make you big again here so you can see her regular size figure before the big drop. So it's kind of a story choice, which let's get into that next, but overall I'd say this is a little upgrade since it's mainly enhancing the background and giving depth. Number 5, the story. So which ride has a better story? Honestly, they're both pretty simple. Tiana is throwing a party and needs to find musicians, and along the way you get shrunk down. In Splash Mountain, Brer Rabbit is running away from home and Brer Fox and Brer Bear are trying to capture him. Inherently, these stories are both fine for a theme park ride. They have simple premises, and just at a glance, neither one is better than the other. I've seen a lot of people talk about the story in Splash in this grandiose way, like, oh, it had so much depth, there was conflict and tension, it's why people love the ride. Splash Mountain was about a bunny running away from home, let's not act like it's Shakespeare. But I do think that there's a big difference in how the story is executed. Theme park rides don't need a traditional story with a beginning, middle, and end to be satisfying. Haunted Mansion doesn't have a plot. Same with Pirates. They tacked on this thing about Jack Sparrow needing to find a treasure map, but it is really beside the point of the ride. Both of these are full of vignettes, or interesting bite-sized scenes. You're in the middle of an interesting moment, and then you move on to another interesting moment, and your brain fills in what's in between. Walt Disney famously compared it to walking through a cocktail party and hearing different bits of conversation and picking up certain information and details. Splash Mountain had a ton of vignettes. Things are happening everywhere. Brer Bear is stuck in a trap, Brer Rabbit is laughing at them. There are critters all around, and this leads to a lot of little gags or fun moments. This is where having fewer animatronics really hurts Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The beginning scenes are just a lot simpler. There are not a ton of gags going on. You kind of get the whole idea of the scene as soon as you see it. I think this first scene would be way more successful if there was more of a sense of the whole bayou coming to life to join in to make the music. Little possums hanging above you clapping their hands, turtles popping out of the water, frogs hopping to the beat, pelicans open their mouths and little fish are singing or dancing. These figures could be simple as they had in Splash Mountain, but it would add a lot more visual delight to the scenes and really sell the story of trying to find musicians, like the whole Bayou is auditioning for Tiana. The story doesn't need to be more complex. In fact, the end scene works great because it does feel like a cocktail party. Maybe because it is one. So in this case, I say that the story for Tiana is a downgrade, not because there's anything inherently wrong with the premise of Tiana's Bayou Adventure, but there aren't enough to the scenes to support the story. I've also seen some complaints that Tiana's Bayou Adventure doesn't have an antagonist. I do think that having Brer Fox and Brer Bear helps Splash because it's another source of visual gags. It's a cat and mouse trope similar to Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote or Tom and Jerry. It's a good source of slapstick comedy. But once again, an antagonist isn't needed for a great ride, like Haunted Mansion or Pirates. And I kinda get Disney avoiding anything too scary in this ride because it's bitten them in the past. But it is an interesting choice because Princess and the Frog has a great antagonist. So why didn't they include Shadow Man? Which brings me to surprising creative choices. Disney made some surprising decisions when it came to Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and I think that they're contributing to some of the negative reactions. Theme park attractions traditionally include the most famous iconography. Characters look like they do from the movie. You witness famous scenes, even if they're not exactly the same, they're very reminiscent. If you just heard that they were making a Princess and the Frog ride, you probably guessed that you'd see all the characters from the movie, that Shadow Man and Ray would be there, and that Tiana would turn into a frog and then at some point wear her iconic dress. You might think that last one because that's what Disney showed in the concept art. But Disney made a creative choice to make Tiana's Bayou Adventure pretty different than Princess and the Frog, in a way that's surprising for a theme park ride. Now, there are a lot of familiar faces, but this is a sequel to Princess and the Frog. So Ray is in the stars and Shadow Man is banished to the spirit realm. Tiana has completely new looks throughout the ride, and Naveen and Lottie are just briefly in the last scene. Speaking of the finale, this is another surprising choice that ties into Splash Mountain. Its finale featured this big riverboat, and I think a lot of people assumed that they would just reuse it since it fits the theme of Princess and the Frog so well. There's even a riverboat in the movie. Yes, the old riverboat would break a lot since it moved, but Disney could have built a new one, and it would have been a way to tie the new ride to the old ride. But they went in a different direction. I'm not saying this is a bad thing inherently, just that it's surprising. Kind of like not including Dr. Facilier. Yeah, it makes sense since this takes place after the movie, but Disney could have set this during the movie. Nothing forced them to make this a sequel. And even with it being a sequel, they could have brought him back easily because he's inherently supernatural. It's just a surprising creative choice that he's not in the ride. And all these surprising choices are things that I think the average guest will bump up against. Disney has established an expectation that theme park rides will play the greatest hits. People who are big fans of Princess and the Frog want to see their favorite parts of the movie in the theme park ride. Frozen Ever After is also a sequel, but there's still a Let It Go scene and the characters look like they do from the movie. Most people going to Disney World or Disneyland aren't like you and me and have been closely following the development of this ride. They don't know that it's a sequel. And I think expectations will hurt this ride's reception, because when it has fewer vignettes and not as many gags as the ride it replaced, and doesn't include the characters and most famous iconography from the movie it's based upon, a lot of people might come away feeling like it's a downgrade. Despite the fact it has some amazing animatronics, well-realized environments, and it's based on a great movie. Overall, I think that there's a lot to like for Tiana's Bayou Adventure, especially that finale scene. But it suffers from comparisons to what it replaced and expectations that Disney itself has established. What do you think? Is Tiana an upgrade or a downgrade? Let me know, and be sure to get subscribed for more Disney videos. This has been James from Guide to WDW. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you real soon.